Let's start with Aaron Gilchrist at the White House. And Aaron, I understand you have some news about President-elect Trump.
We do. We know that this is obviously, TikTok is something that President-elect Trump has applauded in the past. He said that that platform was a key part of him winning the youth vote in the election last November. And we understand from one of his posts on his social media platform that he spoke with Chinese President Xi Jinping earlier today. According to this post, he said that it was a good call. And he also noted a couple of things here. He said that it's his expectation that we will solve many problems together. And then he goes on to say, we discussed balancing trade, fentanyl, TikTok, and many other subjects. An indication that this is something not only that the incoming administration, this platform is something that it not only wants to see go forward, but that it's now an active part of the conversation between the incoming president and the leader of China. We know that China is sending a delegate, if you will, to attend the inauguration on Monday. It'll be interesting to see, Anna, if there's potentially a conversation that happens at some point while that person is here in Washington. I believe the Chinese vice president is the person that we anticipate will be representing China at the inauguration on Monday. And obviously, the Biden administration has taken the position that because this law would go into effect on Sunday, and the day after is a federal holiday, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and Inauguration Day. For that reason, the Biden administration believes that it would be up to the next administration to implement this law, to start the enforcement action with this law, something that the Trump team, by way of the incoming national security advisor, in an interview he did yesterday, he said that they want to see TikTok stick around, and they're going to figure out a way to make that possible. Anna.
And so, Ryan, as of Monday, again, Trump's administration takes over, although we were just covering this week the confirmation hearings. He won't necessarily have his attorney general pick in place on day one, or at least immediately following his inauguration. So how does this transition impact enforcement of this law?
Yeah, I mean, to Aaron's point, there's not the issue with Monday as well is that it is a federal holiday. And I should also say, just, on a practical level, D.C. is on lockdown right now. I mean, I'm across from the Capitol here, and there are fences, everything is up. And, this is, I think, more intense than it was certainly the last time around that we had a real inauguration because, obviously with Joe Biden, that was during COVID. It was sort of a different sort of experience. But last time when Donald Trump was inaugurated, for example, it was a lot easier to get inside of just the Justice Department practically. I'm getting a lot of emails now, going away emails from Justice Department employees who are having to depart. And because there is that because the Monday is a federal holiday, a lot of those resignations are actually going to effect today. So people are not waiting for that over the weekend. They've been told to resign. They have to resign effectively today. And in fact, Merrick Garland, whilst he will still be on and will be, on call essentially until noon on Monday, is having his walkout ceremony from the Justice Department just this afternoon. So, there is going to be short staff, and this is this major issue. And there's really only 36 hours on Sunday until Donald Trump becomes president once again. So when this would go into effect, that you're really only talking about a very narrow scope of time on a Sunday before a federal holiday. There's just a lot of complications for why I think, Joe Biden has decided that they're not going to enforce that for at least that 36 hours that theoretically it could be into effect. And then, the big question is what's going to happen next. Obviously, I think a lot of eyes, along with eyes being on Mark Zuckerberg and a lot of eyes being on Elon Musk at the Capitol on the inauguration, are also going to be on that CEO of TikTok and how that dynamic is going to play out, because obviously Donald Trump has concluded that he benefited from TikTok and knows it's very important with the youth. So I think that is something that he'll be focused on and concentrated on, because there could be a lot of political backlash for anyone who opposes TikTok or was behind this law, even though there was this bipartisan sort of support for it. This could turn, I think, very quickly, and we see these social media pressure campaigns be very effective and can convince people, even sometimes when the facts are completely against them, of different different positions, and can convince people very easily. So I think that's something that we should be watching out for, all of these tech CEOs, and how that interaction between Donald Trump is going to work with those CEOs.
So, Barrett, pick up where Ryan left off on just the enforcement piece, this government transition, and just the practicality and logistics of enforcing a decision like this.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, the law was not directed to TikTok necessarily. The law is going to be directed to US-based companies like Apple, Google, and how they choose to go about the enforcement. I cannot imagine a world where the general counsel of Apple is not scrambling right now, trying to figure out how to advise their CEO, how to advise, their millions of employees what to do with this app on its platform now. I think even if we see a scenario where President-elect Trump comes in and says, I am directing the Justice Department not to enforce this law, I can't imagine a situation where those companies are going to take a great deal of comfort with that, given that you now have a law that was passed with bipartisan support that the Supreme Court has, said can go ahead and go be enacted. I can't imagine that they would feel comfortable just because the president says it's not going to enforce it. Again, the Supreme Court's opinion was very clear. It was very direct. It was not, a wide sweeping opinion, but they didn't leave a lot of wiggle room in saying there were real national security concerns that were proposed. There were issues with, the data collection of millions of Americans by a foreign adversary. And again, if I am the general counsel of Apple or Google, it's hard to just put those aside and say, I'm going to ignore something that the Supreme Court has said, is a potential real national security threat just on the potential word of the president.
So, Barrett, this is a situation where the law as it's written would not apply to the individual user. It's not the person who uses the app that could potentially be punished, right? Do we know what the punishment is for the companies that then would be, in effect, breaking the law should they keep TikTok on their platforms?
Yeah, so great point. So individual users don't need to be worried that they're suddenly going to be fined. That will be a big relief for my 14-year-old daughter, who is moaning about this as we speak. But really, it's directed at the companies that would support this. So there would be fines based on the number of users, but even something that would be, let's say, a $5,000 fine, all of a sudden, if you have 170 million users, you're really talking about penalties that could skyrocket up into the billions of dollars. So the penalties are potentially, incredibly severe for these companies. And that's why I think it's going to be very difficult for them just to ignore the law when it goes in, even if there is going to be a lot of initial confusion, which undoubtedly there will be in the next few weeks.
Barrett Berger, thank you so much for joining us. I want to bring in NBC's Julie Surkin now on Capitol Hill. And Julie, lawmakers are starting to weigh in on this decision. What are you hearing?
Oh, absolutely. And Leader Schumer actually opened the Senate floor this morning before this ruling from the Supreme Court came into effect, again stressing the need for an American company to buy TikTok, or at least buy certain parts of it. And certainly this is a conversation that is going to keep happening on Capitol Hill. Let's remember how this bill originally passed in the spring. In the Senate, it was part of a larger foreign affairs package, so meaning many Democrats voted for a TikTok ban that might have not even wanted to do that. And that is why you're hearing, particularly from Democrats, Ed Markey, for example, who wants Congress to pass another piece of legislation that would give the president the authority to extend beyond the 90 days that are already baked into this legislation, but extend even further and give ByteDance time to find an American-based purchaser of the app. I want you to take a listen to a little bit of reaction that we've collected from Republicans who both support the ban, who don't support the ban, and of course a Democrat as well on the next steps here. Watch.
Senator, your reaction to the TikTok ruling?
Disappointment. I do believe that banning a social media app like TikTok is a violation of the First Amendment.
The best way for TikTok to continue to exist is for it to be sold, which the law explicitly allows for. Why you ban it is controlled by Beijing. So if it were sold or firewalled, that would be fine.
The TikTok ban is fully and fairly constitutional. TikTok should not be banned. It should be sold. China should not own it, but it should continue to exist in this country.
And I think that's the bottom line here and what Ryan was getting at. Millions of Americans use this app. There is a pressure campaign. In fact, when Congress was even voting to take up this bill last spring, I remember all of the creators all over these hallways trying to put pressure, trying to meet with lawmakers to get them to not vote for that piece of legislation. As far as Rand Paul is concerned, certainly there are some Republicans who feel the way he does, that this does violate Americans' First Amendment rights. Of course, the Supreme Court poked holes in that argument with their decision today. I think what you're going to see in in the coming weeks. Of course, it'll be important to see what the incoming administration decides to do on this, especially as Ryan points out, with all of those CEOs, the tech billionaires sitting in the front row for his inauguration. But ultimately, I think Congress and this debate is certainly not over in terms of lawmakers pushing the administration to extend this deadline even further. I think Trump seems to be coming around to that. But all in all, I think a majority of lawmakers are on the same page. They want this app to continue. They want Americans to have access to it, but they don't want it to be in the hands of our foreign adversaries who, in the words of Josh Hawley, say can track Americans' movements, can track their keystrokes, and of course have access to their personal information on it.
So is it a change of heart that they're having, or is it politics here, behind their messaging right now? Like, actually, TikTok's a good thing. It just needs to be in different hands.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, and I think it starts with the fact that when this bill originally passed in the House and Senate, it had overwhelming bipartisan support. I mean, especially in the House, because they did vote on it separately outside of the bills to Ukraine, aid to the Middle East as well. In the Senate, that was all packaged up. So it's really hard to tell which one of those senators really supported this law or voting for this law. I think overall, though, at that point, you have to remember that both Trump and Biden had signaled support for legislation like this, and I think they thought that perhaps by this point, they'd be able to find a buyer, an American-owned company that could take over TikTok from ByteDance. Of course, ByteDance has been completely unwilling to do so. Your great guest made great points about why would they even want to go along with something like this, given that they have significant business in other countries. I think there's a different political calculation right now, especially after the election, when you saw even Trump benefiting from that young vote, the young men especially, that of course have been using the app as well. So it's not just Democrats benefiting from TikTok and trying to get voters up to turn up at the polls and vote for their policies. It is also Republicans that have seen benefits from that. The calculation, of course, has changed in the last couple of months. And I think a part of this, in terms of Democrats who've been appealing to the White House in the last couple of days to try and do something about this, is so that Trump does not preserve the app that Democrats ultimately wanted to ban on it.
Julie Sirkin, thanks for your reporting. And Lisa, I know you had something you wanted to add here.
Well, I've been thinking about what assurances various companies have that the law will or will not be enforced. There's a lot of very strenuous language in the bill itself that says the Attorney General shall do something, or defines what these companies are that are affected by the law as companies that are directly or indirectly controlled by a company in one of these foreign countries that owns at least 20%. So you don't have to own the entirety of the company. ByteDance would essentially have to divest itself below 20% to make this okay. On the other hand, nobody can make Donald Trump and his Department of Justice enforce this law. And when I think about other companies that might have an interest in wanting TikTok off the market, could Meta sue to make the Department of Justice enforce the law? I don't think they would have standing to do so. And I don't think there's anybody else with what we call a private right of action to bring a lawsuit to necessitate the enforcement of this law. So companies are going to have to settle for, yes, it will probably remain on the books, but they're going to have to deal with the assurance, no, we won't enforce it. That's sort of where we are right now, for example, in the Biden administration with the Comstock Act, which affects the sending through the mail of abortion medication. That's something that hasn't been enforced since Roe v. Wade. But in this coming administration, people fear that it could be. That's just the state of living in a world where some administrations want to enforce laws on the books and some don't.
And Brian, have we heard anything at all from Apple, Google, or any of their social media competitors to TikTok?
We're out for comment from, first off, TikTok. We haven't heard back from them yet, and also to Google and Apple, whether or not they're going to basically say outright, I wouldn't expect them to do so, that they're going to continue providing their services. But again, there's a lot of uncertainty over how this plays out. But for the 170 million users that have TikTok right now, it's going to be a very uncertain next few months whether or not the app is going to continue working. Although it sounds like at least through Sunday you might be all right.
Months or a few days. I mean, it's
right.
We'll know so much more probably on Sunday when this ban it goes into effect. Laura, final thought.
There's so much frustration in law enforcement and in government on the idea that people were not taking the national security concerns seriously. And then you listen to lawmakers today and other politicians, and it's as if the lawmakers have totally vanished those national security concerns. And so how do you engage in a public information education campaign to make people realize, no, the thing on your phone is actually very serious if now you don't enforce the law?
That's a really great point. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here with us. I